All right, today we are in Leland, Mississippi, and Jeff Pangle, which is our technical seed agronomist, and I'm Gabe Saxon, the regional agronomist for right here in this part of the world. We're going to talk to you a little bit about side dress nitrogen today. Why is it important? Why do we feel like we need to be doing it as far as a spoon-fed type of thing? We're going to talk about the application side of it, a couple things that we need to make a note of, and then when we get down to the end, we'll talk about some of the products that help us keep that nitrogen in the form that we want to keep it to use, so the plant can use it. We want to keep it in that form as long as we can. So, Jeff, what do you think?
I think it's that time of the year in the Delta. We've got corn that's approaching the V4 or V5 growth stage, and so when we know when we get to V6 that we're setting kernel rows, and it's very important to keep that crop growing rapidly at that stage. So anytime we have an opportunity at V3 or V4 to make a nitrogen side dress application, that'd be a good time to be taking care of that production practice on the farm.
So looking at what Jeff just said, knowing that when we look at how much nutrients are uptaken through that plant through different pipes of the year, we know that from that V4 stage all the way up to about that V8, when we're setting kernel rows and length and all that other stuff going on inside that plant, the nitrogen uptake shoots up a lot. So now's a good time to be in and being beside the plant or being over the top of it to make sure it's got its nitrogen requirements. So the big question is why do we side dress? And we covered that a little bit in the introduction, but I think we need to really understand what we're messing with. When we start to look at a grass crop, just like any other grass crop, corn is in a high demand for nitrogen. Nitrogen is used throughout the life cycle of that plant, starting at that V4 and running all the way through to V8, V9, then it falls off a little bit, and then of course we need some in the other type of the production when we start to fill the kernels and other things like that. Being in high demand, it allows us to actually move things through the plant a little bit easier. Nitrogen will catch on with some of the other type of nutrients and things like that. But we know right now, while we're sitting at V3 corn and moving forward, we need to make sure that it's got enough nitrogen to support its cycles and what it's trying to do inside of that plant.
All right, on our side dress nitrogen, the next question we want to talk about is how much. And so let's think about this in a total nitrogen program. On corn, we're going to use about 1.2 units of nitrogen per bushel of yield goal. So if our gold standard or yield standard for corn is 225 bushels, that means we're in a 270 unit corn program. So let's assume for figuring purposes, for calculations, that we've got 90 units under our corn already, or 1/3. So we've got 180 units of nitrogen that still needs to be fed to this plant. So that's going to be our objective during the side dressing program, is to get the rest of this 180 units of nitrogen to our crop.
So the when process of when do we actually do this? Now this is going to change from producer. It's going to change from the style that they do it and the timing that they've got. Right now we're kind of in a crunch time, so we've got guys that are putting beans in the field and at the same time they're trying to side dress corn.
Yeah.
So the when of it is basically we want to make sure that we stay when the corn is coming up to that V3, V4 stage, and we want to try and get the side dress application on before V6. The reason that we're doing this, and we talked about it a little bit in the introduction, is that the plant is rapidly growing at that point in time. Anybody that knows corn, when we go out into the field, they know this is the time of the year where you can actually say, I can walk out in the field and hear it growing. Well, at that point in time, we know for it to kind of kick into its cycles and to grow, we've got to have nitrogen. So if we can get in there from that V3 to V6 stage, that should give us enough nitrogen in that plant to get us at least through tassel, and then maybe at that point in time through tissue samples and other things like that, may actually have to do a tassel shot.
The next part of the knifing process, the side dress fertilizing process for corn with the nitrogen, is how we're going to get it out there. So we've talked about how much and when, so now we're going to talk about the physical, actual process to get that done. So typically there's two main processes that we use to get side dress nitrogen applied to our corn crop. First one is knifing that in, which is a preferred practice in the fact that it puts the nitrogen right in the ground where the corn's where it's readily available to the corn. So that's a popular knifing practice for corn. It's slower That's a detriment. It's a lot of times people don't have access to knifing rigs, so that's a downside too. So the alternative to that is we're going to put out our side dress nitrogen as a broadcast, as broadcast urea. We can either do that with a plane or with a truck. And so we're going to broadcast nitrogen onto the ground, and then we're going to have some sort of process to get it in the ground. Hopefully it's right ahead of a rain, and so that would put it into the soil because it's critical that we maintain our nitrogen, we take good care of our nitrogen.
So Jeff covered the how when we start talking about whether we're going to use a dry type fertilizer over the top or if we're going to do a side dress application, preferably with a liquid 32 or something like that, maybe a 28005 or something. But either way, when we start to look at these applications, we need to make sure that we're protecting our nitrogen. In the last 15 years, we've come a long way on what we started out with some of the things that we could use. But now we've got a lot of different options. There's a lot of different companies out there. But the two basic ones that we really want to cover or talk about would be, hey, how do I protect my urea application as we start to put it on to make sure that as it starts to denitrify and go through the process, that we keep it in that nitrate form the best that we can. Well, about the only way that we can do that would be a urease inhibitor. And that is basically going to protect us from volatilization. And that's the key when we start looking at dry fertilizers. As we look at the fertilizer that we're knifing in or side dressing, whether it's a 32 or 28 or something like that, we really need to pay attention to not necessarily volatilization, because we're kind of protected down in the ground from that, but then we run into leaching. And everybody in the South knows that we've got soils that'll probably leach unless we're sitting on some of that soil that holds the world together. So either way, we want to make sure at that point in time that we're looking at a nitrification inhibitor. And when I say inhibitor, we're not necessarily inhibiting the process. We're basically slowing it down so we can keep that nitrogen in that nitrate form, which is what's readily available to the plant. That's what it wants to use. That's how it uses it. So a little bit of, I guess we went over the why, the how much, the when, the how. Now all we need you to do is go out, check your corn,